Report, but we have way more material to cover, but we wanted to make sure we get you all to talk. You like to talk to each other, right? Yes. Okay, good. We want to make sure that's a good question. Okay. So let's hear for a second. Just what were some of the moments that you share around either failure or perception of failure, different metrics? Anybody who would like to share?
Well, I'm part of the divestment from fossil fuels company, so it's like almost really clear to me how some things can be failures, some things can be successes. So, for example, a failure would be like if the board of trustees says no, we're not going to divest, and we'll like refuses to engage with the students because that's very structure based. Like we think that the board of trustees has the leverage over the change that we want to see, so we target them. But like in terms of when I think about the past 2 years, the divestment campaign was launched really recently, but like how much has become a national dialogue and everyone's heard about like Harvard and President Voss like being really idiotic. I see that polarization and I'm like, wow, this is actually entering public consciousness, but I don't think that's as explicitly measured as a success. Oh, like this is a win we can celebrate. It's more just like things are cooking. But I do think it's energizing people though. It's just not as explicit as it possibly could be, in my opinion.
Do people, your members and the people who are leaders in the divestment movement, do they feel excited about the polarization, or do they feel deflated because they haven't won the instrumental demands?
I think, I mean, I can't speak for, like, I can sort of generally say, I think people feel excited, but also still a little frustrated with the administration because they're just being so, like, I think we feel like we've done really great work, but yet the administration's still not budging, you know, like, some administrations still aren't, so I think that can be a little frustrating, and it's almost like, where do we, I mean, this is like a conversation we're having, like, does that mean we should, like, focus more on, like, actually how to harness this as a national movement, and, like, how that can actually, instead of, like, individual campuses, like, just doing it separately and sort of assuming that becomes a movement, but, like, being, like, if we focus on, like, how to coordinate things on a national scale, how that can actually help from, like, by creating the political climate to help things move or incremental changes happen on our individual campuses, like being part of the external pressure that like the board of trustees are like, whoa, this is a national thing, I have to act on it.
But I want to slow down a little. Okay. When did you launch the divestment campaign?
Not Holyoke or like
No, in general, nationally. I think I was at a do your math tour.
Fall 2012 is when it took off.
Okay. Did it build your organizational capacity?
Yeah.
How much?
Like 100%.
Like amazing. Like groups all over the country started. Thousands of people were organized into the movement. Yes?
Yes.
Right? Did it create good polarization?
Lots of public figures are taking stances on it. So, not great yet.
Well, you're fighting against the largest propaganda system the world has ever fought against, and you guys are creating lots and lots of good media towards your cause. And on a lot of campuses, you're bringing a lot of people to your cause, right? So, does it create good polarization? Is that successful? Probably one of the most successful thing the climate, climate movement has ever done. Do people feel that way in your movement?
We do Pet Swarthmore because we were there when there was only one, when no one else was doing it. But
Well, no, I think in general, there are a few more. There are a few folks who have been in the movement longer who are feeling more frustrated and are
Mhm.
feeling less successful.
Mhm.
But there's also, like, I would say the majority of students who are involved with divestment campaigns are just really excited to be part of a divestment campaign
Yeah.
and be part of something that's really big.
Because they haven't been trained around how your movement has framed success and victory. The
Mhm.
public that is joining, they just see everything that we just talked about, right?
So we train our public that comes in, we train them to see failure as what we want them to see, and sometimes we demoralize our own public.
That's right.
That's so sad.
It's your fault they're sad.
I have a quick question for everybody. How many of you through the conversation, you were already starting to reframe everything? Raise your hand if you were starting to reframe things. You were like, well, let me just change this, let me just change it, let me change it. Okay.
Our confusion about framing.
What is it?
Confusion around framing, like,
Which word to pick?
yeah, like what to focus on.
How much, how much do we think in the movements and organizations, how much do we spend time thinking about framing victory?
It's usually like embedded almost with the target and what
It's
that target.
Can you say that aloud?
I feel like our victories are embedded with the target. Like whatever the target does, it's gonna be either good or bad for our framing of victory. So I think we need to detach from target and measure victory within our organization and with our public support just based on narrative and based on growth and capacity. And whether the target moves or not, whatever, but it's like literally like just really stepping away from the target, I think.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, the big thing that I thought about was, so our fracking campaign in Illinois, we have a de facto moratorium on fracking because we submitted 35,000 public comments, which just like broke the regulatory agency. And then right after that, which there was huge energy around, we packed public hearings, like people across the state really did an amazing job. And then coming out of that energy, we had our public meeting where we sort of tricked the governor's office into this commitment. We got him to commit to not issuing any permits, like not allowing the agency to issue any permits until this like huge set of like holes in the rules as they currently exist were fixed. And what I was thinking about was like that, we entirely see that as like that continued, that like sort of solidified the de facto moratorium that we have, and got the governor to be, a voice when like it was essentially like the rules were gonna come out was sort of the framing, and like we certainly saw that as a stepping stone, but like did not do any of the work of like framing that victory. And so people, like that happened and people were just like, well, but we want to ban fracking. Like, why do we want these like, fixes on the rules? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And it just like, that didn't build our capacity or organization at all, that we got that commitment and are now just kind of like focused on that and not able to build any type of momentum from it. And I think that was a right decision in the campaign, but we just didn't do the work of like going to the movement and like, framing why that could be a victory.
Among your people, okay, among your participants and your leaders of the movement, did it build your organizational capacity of your movement, that action?
So the governor, like getting the governor's commitment did not.
It did not.
No.
So doing the action didn't involve lots of people?
Well,
get
the
everyone
public
build your
meeting
organization?
itself was like really powerful. Yeah.
You just said, what I heard from your campaign, I don't know, but what you heard from the campaign is that this fracking campaign that you did, not just that one action, massively involved tons of people, and it was a great thing to mobilize lots of people around and build your movement. That's what I was hearing from you, is that?
Yeah, but I guess that we weren't and still aren't really able to fully absorb that energy.
Yeah. Well, the second thing I have is, did it create good polarization around fracking?
Yeah. It still kind of feels like we're under the general public's radar, though.
I bet you money that if you had a pollster, or if I did just random sampling of just interviewing people in the state, I bet you it created a lot of good publicity and moved a lot of people against fracking. I'm guessing. Because if the movement does a lot of activity, it elevates the opposition and creates a lot of stories where the public starts questioning that and moves them. It polarizes. So I'm guessing if you just talk to a hell of a lot of people and you had pollsters went out and did it scientifically, but you don't need that if you just went around, I think you'd realize that you probably polarize a lot of people in your direction.
Dylan, didn't you just say that you had such a massive turnout that it kind of shut down the mechanism?
So around the hearings, which were in November, and I guess it feels like we sort of fell flat after that.
Okay.
This is what I would say. I think this is useful. First of all, thank you so much for sharing. How many of us felt talking about the moments of failure are hard because we put all this effort into doing this and then we feel deflated? How many of you felt that way when we were talking? I want to acknowledge that because I also don't want us to feel like we're talking to fail like it's something like, oh yeah, whatever. No, I think it's painful for some of us. They give up so much of our time, some of our energy, ask people to join us, and then we don't feel like we're delivering for people. Is that true? Do other people feel that way? And I felt, to be honest with you, when we did this Lambda campaign, we lost like 5 days before Christmas Day. And we were utterly depressed. I mean, and I just cannot tell you how much guilt I had that I felt I was part of leading people to a hellhole. But actually, technically, we were winning. But you gotta understand that, remember that we talked yesterday about story? And how much we tell ourselves a story that programs are thinking about how we should feel. Same thing says with victory. And what I would say before we go into the second part, which I think is very useful, is like, don't ever, if I could say you one thing about this session, don't ever, ever, ever give the measure of success to your opposition. Or to the people that do not have your agenda. Like President Barack Obama in some ways in the immigrant movement. He does not have our agenda. Yet we give him the measurement of success all the time. So I would say that happens in a lot of movements across. But it's about holding it for ourselves.
I just want to say this. This skill is one of the most important thing for me when I advise students of all these different campuses, okay? Because they always ask me, are we doing it right, Paul? Is things good? And I asked them 2 questions. Did it move? Did it create public support for your cause? And did it create movement capacity? And it's so frustrating for me that every time I get involved in a movement, I got involved in Occupy LA, okay? We got massive press coverage around income inequality. I have spent years trying to get people to look at income inequality in Los Angeles through the labor movement. I could never get any press coverage, okay? I did tens of thousands of people marched around income inequality. We got no press. Occupy LA comes on the scene. All of a sudden we get major press around this issue, okay? Polarizes so many people. Politicians are talking about income inequality in a way we've never seen before. And the movement capacity is growing. The labor movement is recruiting new organizers. Lots of things are happening. New organizations are being born. And 80% of the people that I talk to in Occupy LA see it as a failure. And I'm like, what is happening here? That I have to go and say, are you kidding me? This is totally an amazing success. This is one of the biggest successes in my lifetime, is right now during Occupy. And that doesn't happen just with Occupy, that happens with the global justice movement, that happens with all these movements. And the first thing you need to realize is you need to train your movement to do what I'm doing. Everyone needs to have that capacity to ask those 2 questions over and over and over again, and to really feel and take stock of the victory, to say, yes, we're winning. Are you kidding me? You know, the divestment campaign is awesome. You have to tell that to your base, and you have to train your base to say, yes, this was great. We won popular support and we won organization.
Well, I wanted to do 2 things. One is, as ISM's official hype man, and other Occupy people might get annoyed about this, but I always like to introduce ISM as the dude who started Occupy Wall Street, which is kind of true. He started the first assembly that led to the public assembly, and so I just would love to give him and or other folks from the group an opportunity to talk about this with Occupy, because I think I at least realize a lot of shit about this that
Occupy our hearts, rock and roll.
Can I add a question to that, actually? I'm thinking about it, and I should get over here from Occupy, because Occupy had a somewhat, elusive, like enemy, in a way. And I think I'm struggling with a similar thing, where it's like, how do you define, like, you know, and I would say that Occupy somewhat defined it well, and somewhat was still kind of like, great, you know, our structure is set up totally wrong, but what, you know, so, I don't know, that's another thing that I'm just sitting here thinking about in terms of how you frame victories and.
But one thing before we go on with that, because that's a really important thing, but I want to go to the Occupy, but I want to say there's two things. One is how our movement and participants frame victory, okay? And that's the metrics that I'm talking to you about. The second one is how we frame it with the public and the media. Okay, those are two. So right now, let's not talk about how Occupy framed it with the public. Let's talk about internally how people felt assessing it.
So I can maybe comment on that. So with Occupy, I actually kind of push back about that, because I think that through the occupation, who the enemy was became extremely clear, and that was, you know, even if Wall Street was just a kind of stand-in for capitalism, right? Like, those people felt super alienated during the occupation because Occupy was extremely successful in polarizing. Now, as far as measuring metrics of success and how people who were in the movement felt about what would be the indicators of success, that was not really their understanding. They didn't think about polarization as success. It really became, first of all, there was no real mechanism for deciding how we were going to measure success, and then the default fell to, do we have the park or not? And so we kind of established, you know, because it fell back to that, it became, when we lost the park, everyone thought we were losing, you know, when in reality we were polarizing more than anyone ever had on the subject in, like, known history, right? And so, that was like a really interesting question for us to make. And a lot of that because we didn't have a way of, and Brooke was talking about, it's interesting, the question of demands, because there was a very live question for a long time in Occupy, will we have demands, will we not have demands? And even reflecting on that debate, we ultimately decided to not have demands. But even the debate of what the suggested and proposed demands were would have also set us up for failure. They would be like universal employment, which, you know, people will like balk at. You know, like, we would never have won that. We didn't even have the standing to put on that. And so the demands we were even kind of suggesting would have destabilized us and would have made us really weak. And so thinking about, like, what if our demand was to spread class consciousness, and, you know, by that metric we would have been a huge success, right? But because it defaulted to the part, it was all the energy.
Yeah, I mean, being involved like before, it was interesting to see how quickly expectations rose. And it's just like, when before, like, I think a lot of us were just happy that we were trying something new, that we were trying to respond to these like global encampment waves, and that we were doing, and you know, talking to people beforehand, they're like, yeah, this probably isn't gonna work, but at least we're trying something different. You know, like, people were happy in just trying something new, because, you know, the left was sort of caught in a boring repetition. And so I think that was, but then like once it started to like establish itself, expectations were extremely high. And so managing expectations was like a big part of it, where even myself, and I think the first time I met Max, I was like, yeah, dude, we're gonna overthrow capitalism in like
in 10 days.
months.
In 10 days.
Did I say 10 days?
Yeah, we gotta figure out how to overthrow global capitalism in 10 days. And I was like, all right.
You know, and so it was difficult to even get a stable subjective position when things were so dynamic.
Yeah, that's right.
When it just like it exploded, and then I was like, shit, well, if it just keeps going on for 10 days, like at this rate, we can overthrow capitalism, you know? And so it became like, it was such a new experience that it became very difficult to orient expectations. What was success? And because, you know, you were just so caught up in the moment, yeah, it became very
So in Serbia, when they had a decentralized organizational structure, they did a week-long training for 40,000 activists that joined their movement. And the first thing they taught them was the theory of change